Chapter 13, Lesson 4, Texas and the War with Mexico. So this is a major league expansion of U.S. territory. We're going to get right to it. Texas and Mexico, Texas was a part of Mexico. It was just an area of Mexico. Mexico was originally under Spanish control, and then in 1821, after a war of 10 years, Mexico became independent from Spain, but obviously still Texas was a part of that. The Mexicans, they tried to get Mexicans to settle there, but not a lot of people wanted to go there. I guess it was maybe too far north, too far away from the regular part of Mexico. And they worried that Americans would settle there. The government did worry that Americans would settle there and sort of claim the land. So to get ahead of things, they decided to invite in a group of settlers that are Americans that they think they can control. So in 1821, they invite in a group led by a guy named Moses Austin. It turns out his son is the guy who leads the settlers in. They bring 300 families, and their nickname is the Old 300 because his father died, so he had to bring him in. And gradually more people come in and move in without really the permission of the Mexican government because the land was cheap or even free in some cases. Now, there were some problems because the settlers, when they came in, some of them had slaves, and they were allowed to keep their slaves even though slavery was illegal in Mexico. Originally it was. They also agreed that they would learn Spanish and become Roman Catholic, but they really did not do either of those things, even though they said they would. And they kind of felt like they didn't have to obey Mexico's laws since the government was so far away from them. Now this conflict eventually basically leads to the war. That's a problem. And Mexico did start worrying about losing control of Texas, and because basically there were 3 Americans for every 1 actual Mexican. And in 1829, Mexico makes a move that really outrages the American Texans. They outlaw slavery outright, and they make it clear they're going to start enforcing this. And a lot of the planters said they needed slaves to grow the cotton, because that's what a lot of the stuff that was growing in Texas was. Stephen Austin goes to Mexico City to meet with the government and to ask for, to say, hey, can we actually work this out? And he's arrested and he was jailed for a year. So not exactly the message that he wanted to get from them. And when that happens, also, the backdrop of this is that a guy named Santa Anna takes over the Mexican government. When he takes over the Mexican government, it's basically called a coup, a military leader when he takes over an area. And he says now that I'm in charge, and I'm in charge for life. And he was determined to make sure that Texas wouldn't leave. And many of the people in Texas had basically been against him taking over, and so he did not like that area very much. And so the Texas Army had gone ahead and linked up with some other groups that were sort of fighting against him, or at least providing an opposition against him, and this turns into the what's called the Texan War of Independence. Texas's War of Independence, that's what they call it. And the Texas Army took control of in the most famous incident, took control of a mission called the Alamo in San Antonio. There's a picture of it today. And the Mexican troops surrounded it, and for 2 weeks they basically were able to, the people inside were able to fight off the Mexican troops, even though they were outnumbered by something like 10 to 1 or at least 5 to 1. And while this is going on, after 2 weeks, most of the people inside, they got killed after it was over. The delegates, eventually, while this all going on, while this start of the war is going on, they declare independence from Mexico, sort of like, the United States declared independence from England. And they called their new country the Republic of Texas. In another battle, Santa Anna, who was not a nice guy, treated prisoners really brutally. He executed maybe up to 350 after they'd surrendered, so there were prisoners, and not a nice guy, but he pays with it with basically half of his territory. Texas forces in this major battle at San Jacinto, that's a battle where what ends up happening is that they surprise Santa Anna's forces, and when they do, they're able to quickly capture him. It takes a little bit over 15 minutes to capture the guy. And when they capture him, they basically say, are you sure you don't want to give us independence? And yes, then he says, yeah, we will give you independence if you release me. But there still are some problems, and we're going to get to that in a minute. They adopt the Lone Star flag. They elect the first guy, Sam Houston, to be president. You get the Houston reference there, and Austin is the capital of Texas. That's a picture of Sam Houston. Now, Sam Houston, he immediately pretty much asked to make Texas his state. But Andrew Jackson, doesn't want to do this, and this keeps coming up, where there's this problem of this slave state versus the free state balance in the nation, and Texas being a big state, it's a problem. And he refused to, Jackson refuses to let it go, to let the U.S. become a state. So it's independent for a while, an independent country, which is sort of unusual for the other states. But Mexico also threatened to go to war if he did let Texas in. Now, the problem is slavery. That's a big issue that we're going to come back to. In 1845, things change, and James K. Polk let Texas into the U.S. Still, there's problems as to what the border is, and you can tell that from checking out this pink area right here. This was the area that was in dispute. The Mexicans said, that's our territory, and the Texans said, no, that's ours. And Polk, James K. Polk, who was the president at the time, he offers to buy New Mexico and California, which is a pretty big chunk of land, for $30 million, but Mexico says no. So Polk sends a guy named Zachary Taylor, who's an important general, to secure the border, and that leads to basically fighting, and that leads to another bad result for the Mexicans. The U.S. troops defeat Santa Anna's troops in 1847 at a place called Buena Vista. War has already spread at this point. California declared independence in 1846. Then in 1850 became a state with the U.S. Santa Fe, which is the capital of New Mexico, is taken over by the Americans as well. And then General Winfield Scott lands, kind of the final blow, lands on the coast of Mexico and marches to Mexico City and makes it clear that he can take over anytime he wants. And the Mexicans give up and ask for peace. Now, in this peace treaty, it's called the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, that ended the war. Mexico lost half of its territory, so yeah, a big old chunk of its territory. And the U.S. gave Mexico $15 million, so it would have been smarter for the Mexicans just to make $60 million instead of having to give up, having to get only 15. Most of the people who stayed there, who were Mexicans, most of the people who were Mexicans stayed there, and they chose to become American citizens. However, some of them were kind of cheated because of their land later on by people who understood English better than some of the court systems. And this really is the start of this idea of the Americans, well, even before that with Texas and California, this belief that the United States should control all the land from the Atlantic Pacific, and this is an idea started by Jane Casno, who was a journalist who was this idea of manifest destiny, where we should control the whole area between the Atlantic and the Pacific. This did have an effect on later land policy, and a lot of people believe this. Now, the war, it was a relatively easy war for the U.S., and that probably was a bad thing on some level. I'll get to why in a second. And it also started to train the officers for the Civil War. It was a great victory. It was relatively easy. So a lot of people looked at war and didn't really think it was going to be horrible or bad, and the Civil War was a nasty, nasty, brutal war. Zachary Taylor, though, he does become famous after his battle in Mexico City. He becomes the 12th president of the United States, and that is all.